Hey everybody, it's Friday again, and believe it or not, this will be the 8th chapter of Robin Hood this week. So that means we've actually been doing this for 7 weeks. Eighth time we're going to be reading, but and we've been in quarantine that whole time. Just seems like forever. Oh well, at least we've got a good story to enjoy. Well, our shout out for today goes to Bobby, the Irish dog. It's a real fun channel, you enjoy it. Bobby is a little Jack Russell Terrier who lives in Ireland, and he sings, he dances, he runs around, chases the ball, and does all kinds of antics and gets into all kinds of fun. And I know you'll just love the channel if you give it a chance. So please check out Bobby the Irish Dog. Alrighty, are we ready for story time? If you remember last time, I don't know where I left my book. Hang on a second. Last time it was how Maid Marian was wedded, and she ended up being married to Robin by the good priest Friar Tuck. But, if you'll recall, at the end they discovered Will Scarlet was not amongst them. He had been wounded in the battle and had been taken prisoner and was being held captive. So, he's in Sir Roger's castle, so let's see what happens, shall we? Alrighty, and this is titled The Prisoner of Evil Hold. It was a day of sorrow in Sherwood Forest. Robin's cousin, Will Scarlet, was much loved by the little band. Little John wept openly like a baby, and Friar Tuck refused food. Marian tried to comfort her husband. "There's nothing that even you can do, dear Robin," she said sadly. "An army of 1,000 knights could not break into Sir Roger's castle." Robin knew she spoke the truth. The castle was called Evil Hold, and it rose highly above a craggy hill. Its smooth walls were built of heavy stone, and a deep moat filled with water surrounded it. A narrow drawbridge led across the moat, and when this bridge was drawn up, Evil Hold was cut off from the world. Will Scarlet was doomed. He lay in chains deep in the gloomy dungeon of Evil Hold. It was dark and dank down there far below the ground, and he could not hear the preparations in the courtyard above for his own death. All he heard was the pitiful cry of an old man in the cell next to his, who was being beaten by Sir Roger's torturer. Sir Roger was in high spirits. He was proud of the fact that he was the only person in Nottinghamshire who had captured one of Robin Hood's men alive. He looked forward to hanging the outlaw, and was putting up stands for his friends to watch the spectacle. They were gaily decorated with banners and bunting, and there would be music and a feast afterwards. Already the serfs and peasants on his estate were bringing in food for the kitchens. One old fellow in a cart was just urging his lean nag over the narrow drawbridge with a load of honeycombs. Sir Roger gave him a lash with his whip to make him hurry up. The poor old fellow cowered in fear, and his blue eyes watered with the pain. If Sir Roger had looked more carefully into those blue eyes, he might have recognized them. But he didn't, and the cart rattled on over the cobblestones into the courtyard. The bent old man got down from the cart, complaining loudly of his rheumatism, but he unloaded his cart with surprising swiftness. "Your honey, honoured sir," he said to Sir Roger, and tossed him one of the parcels from the back of the cart. Sir Roger, furious at the stupidity of the old fool, caught the parcel in his steel gauntleted hand. It was not honey, not exactly. It was a beehive, and was full of very angry bees. They swarmed around the ironclad knight, and though arrows could not penetrate his armor, bees could. As the first one stung him, Sir Roger knew whose blue eyes he had seen. They were Robin Hood's. He gave a shout, and at once his armed men rushed to him. Robin, no longer a bent old peasant, but a very active young man, tossed a half-dozen more beehives at them, and a wasp nest or two for good measure. They yelled so loud that the folk round about thought the castle was being attacked. And suddenly it was. Robin's silver bugle sounded clear and long from the castle walls, and once the throng of peasants and country folk beyond the drawbridge began to crowd forward. Nearly half of them were Robin Hood's own men. One giant of a beggar threw himself toward the drawbridge, but was met by a dozen men in armor. It was Little John, and he grabbed the heavy battle-axe from Sir Roger's chief lieutenant and smashed it down on the fellow's head. It took a charge of cavalry with a spear and lance to dislodge Little John from the drawbridge. Meanwhile, Friar Tuck had wormed his way into the courtyard in the disguise of a begging monk. He picked up the man who was trying to raise the drawbridge and threw him out into the moat, where he sank and drowned. The air was raining arrows now, but they could do little against stone walls and ironclad men. In spite of Friar Tuck and Robin Hood's efforts to prevent the drawbridge from being raised, a score of Sir Guy's men were already tugging at the great chains that held it in position. Friar Tuck and Robin were only 2 against 100. With the drawbridge once up, they would be prisoners as much as Will Scarlet was, and there would not be 1 hanging that day, but 3. Robin's men, led by Little John, threw themselves bravely at the bridge, but they were met with a wall of steel lances. They fell like flies into the moat, but all were good swimmers and reached shore again, where they at once renewed the attack. Their position was hopeless, and they knew it. Not that that stopped them from trying again and again. Only armored knights mounted on armored horses could have broken through the defenses of Evil Hold. Then something very strange took place. Along the dusty road winding up to the castle gates, they saw a single knight galloping. He was a big man, almost as big as Little John, and he was dressed in black. His horse was black. His armor was black. The banner which waved from his tall lance was black. His visor was lowered and no one could see his face. Who was he? No one knew. Lowering his lance, he charged up the drawbridge just before it could be raised. He charged like a steel-clad bull, sweeping all before him. Sir Roger's men were brushed aside by this furious and unexpected attack. Sir Roger, who was no coward, sprang at him, sword in hand. With his huge battle-axe, the Black Knight mowed down the armed men all around him as though they were ripe corn, and with them Roger the Cruel. By the time Robin Hood's men, following after the Black Knight, had swarmed into the courtyard, and the fight raged on every side, Little John, laughing aloud with the joy of battle, swung wildly about him with his heavy cudgel. Friar Tuck tossed the enemy head over heels into the moat. Robin Hood longed to stay and take further part in the savage fray, but he had more important work to do. He could see the mysterious Black Knight afterwards and thank him for saving the day. Meanwhile, Will Scarlet was a prisoner. Robin found the narrow door which led down to the dungeon. On the wet, slippery stairs, Sir Roger's men were still holding out. Robin flung himself on them like a madman, sword in hand. He cut his way through them and at last reached the dark place where Sir Roger kept his prisoners chained. At the door of the torture chamber, he met a huge monster, stripped to the waist, who wore a mask and carried a heavy axe. This was the torturer. In the darkness behind him, Robert heard a man groaning. "Will, Cousin Will, is it you?" Robin called. A feeble voice in the darkness whispered, "Here I am, Robin." Robin turned. By now his eyes were used to the dim light, and he saw poor Will Scarlet's pale face behind the bars of a small prison cell. He grasped the iron door and shook it. "Robin, careful, behind you!" Will gasped just as he fainted. But Robin had already heard the padding of bare feet behind him. He dodged lightly aside as the torturer's heavy axe crashed down. Robin grabbed the brute by the leg. The half-naked man squirmed away and grasped a dagger. Robin seized the axe. It was heavy even for Robin. He swung it, and the monster fell to the dungeon floor, never to rise again. Robin swung the axe a second time. The cell door burst open. Again Robin swung the axe. Will Scarlet's chains clattered to the ground. Will came to again as Robin picked him up. He was weak from loss of blood, and he just managed to whisper, "There's another poor devil in the torture chamber. We must free him too." Robin nodded grimly. He had almost forgotten that pitiful groan he'd heard behind the torturer. They reached the second prisoner with the axe and cut him free from his chains. He was an old man with a white beard and white hair. He had been imprisoned in Evil Hold for so long he was weak from starvation. But even in his miserable condition, they could see that he had once been a man of importance. He thanked them in a courteous voice and said he was strong enough to walk unaided. Will tried to help him, Robin smiling grimly as the two enfeebled men gave an arm to each other. Painfully, the three of them at last reached the courtyard above. The old man blinked at the sight of the sky over his head. He looked in wonder at the sun, which was beginning to sink in glory towards the west. He had not seen the dear light of day or smelt sweet fresh air for nearly a year. A strange sight greeted them as they came out into the courtyard. The battle was over. Sir Roger was dead, and all his knights and men-at-arms were either dead, drowned, or fled. Flames now belched from the high windows of the tall castle. Little John explained that the Black Knight had given orders that the Evil Hold should be set on fire and destroyed. "But where is he?" Robin asked, "that I may clasp his hand in gratitude." No one knew. The Black Knight had ridden away as mysteriously as he had come. They caught only a single glimpse of him, mounted on his black charger, with his black banner flying from the point of his lance. He rode swiftly down the twisting lane and vanished into the sunset like a ghost. No one that day had seen his face. Robin Hood's band gathered together beyond the moat and watched the grim castle called Evil Hold burning. No longer would it be a terror to the countryside. No more poor men would be tortured and killed in its gruesome dungeon. The band returned slowly to Sherwood Forest. Will Scarlet had been saved, and for that they all thanked heaven and the Black Knight. But many of their number had been wounded, and one man had been killed. Marian was waiting for them in the depths of the forest. She had gathered together a handful of countrywomen, relatives for the most part of the band. The women had made supper and prepared bandages and medicines for the returning warriors. For Marian had known that the battle would be fierce and long. She gave thanks to God when she saw that Robin was safe. She threw her arms around him. He held her tenderly for a moment and then said, "There's a poor old gentleman who needs your care, my dear. We found him chained up in Sir Roger's dungeon." Marian ran quickly to the stretcher on which they had carried the feeble old man. She knelt down over him, searching for wounds. He opened his tired old eyes, and as he did so, they lighted up with astonishment and delight. "Marian," he said, "is it possible? Do my eyes deceive me?" Her arms went around him. She went pale, and then she flushed with joy. "Father," she exclaimed, "my dear father, who they told me was dead." And it was indeed Sir Richard of Lee himself. And next week we will move on to Chapter 9, How the Abbot was Paid. That was a good one today, wasn't it? Lots of action. And there's a picture of Maid Marian with her father. You can see that. So, well, we enjoyed that. Well, you know, along with the good, there's always some bad, right? The good news was that Robin and his men saved Will Scarlet and Sir Roger of Lee from the evil knight's castle. Sir Richard of Lee, sorry. Sir Roger was the bad guy. But the bad news is now you have to listen to a groaner. You ready for the groaner? No. A gentleman rushed into a pharmacy, drugstore, chemist, or depending on where you live in the world. went up to the counter and said to the pharmacist, "Quick! I need a cure for hiccups." And the pharmacist stared at the man for a second, ran to the sink, filled a glass with ice-cold water, ran back and threw it in the man's face. The man shook himself and looked at the pharmacist and said, "What in the world did you do that for?" The pharmacist says, "Well, you don't have hiccups anymore, do you?" And the man said, "Well, no, but my wife who has hiccups is out in the car." Well, there you go. You survived another one. Alrighty, folks, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Tuesday in the kitchen, and we'll have some fun. Until then, take care, stay safe. God bless.